How is everyone today? Okay. Eddie's iPad blocked your view of me last week, so he's trying to do better. I'm trying to do better. If you need to move your seat, maybe you can, or if you just want to stay where you are, that's fine too. Okay? We are on week 3 of our God, Our Shepherd series, where we have gone all the way back to the book of Genesis and looked at how God himself and how people have understood God in the role of shepherd. And this week we come to some familiar passages, and I'm going to review a little bit where we've been. And then my hope for today is to say at least one thing new that you haven't already heard. Maybe it's just a perspective, not necessarily a fact, but a perspective, something new about two very familiar passages, Psalm 23 and John 10, which are dear to our hearts for lots and lots of reasons, but I want to bring a fresh perspective on that. And so we have understood so far that sheep and shepherd imagery and the metaphor of God as shepherd has been important over the years because it was well understood by the people to whom it was directed. We've also understood that the quality of shepherds lends itself to leadership, and we have sort of mined the role of shepherd as a model for leaders that God has put forth for us to think about. And then we have seen shepherds depicted as not only leaders, but providers, guides, protectors, companions of the sheep, figures of authority. And we have seen in the Old Testament where the language of the prophets was God speaking to critique or criticize the kings who were not good shepherds. And we have seen God, who in Genesis was referred to as the shepherd of Jacob, then has all these kings, they're terrible shepherds, and we hear God's intention to reclaim his flock. And that carries us through. Jeremiah 31:10 was an important verse for us because it says, "The one that scattered Israel will gather them as a shepherd gathers his flock." And I think somebody came up to me after class and asked me particularly about that. How can it be that God is the one who scattered Israel? And it's worth just getting your mind around that for 1 second. The way that the God of Abraham's people understood themselves throughout history was that God allowed them to be taken over by foreign powers as a form of rebuke over the centuries. There's lots and lots in the Old Testament about what they call the apostasy of the Jews, where the Jewish people have God's guidance and they ignore it, and they don't treat widows and orphans justly, and the kings are terrible leaders, and there's just this depravity of humanity. And the way that has been captured in the stories that have come forward is that God was rebuking them by allowing them to have foreign leadership. And so we see the phrase, "The one that scattered Israel will gather them as a shepherd gathers the flock." Do we know if that is God's MO? No. Do we believe this side of the resurrection that God is somehow always intervening with rebuking actions toward us? No. We have an understanding because God has given us that understanding of that loving, providing nature of God, and that what God does is let us choose, and if we're really, really have a long view of things, God can take even our bad choices and redeem them and make them purposeful and have a purpose. So Anyway, Isaiah 40 has beautiful language that doesn't use the word sheep and shepherd directly, but it uses words we know go with sheep and shepherds, leading gently, using the strength and the resting place of holiness. So that's sort of the big picture into which we find ourselves plunging when we come to Psalm 23. And like I said, my vision is, what can we possibly say about Psalm 23 that has not already been said? And I wrote, probably not much. But here is a perspective. It comes from a book called The Good Shepherd by Kenneth Bailey. And I like it because it uses the structure of the psalm that's internal and integral to its content to make the points that it wants to make. And so what Kenneth Bailey brings to the analysis of Psalm 23 is he divides it into, I might call them vignettes, he calls them cameos, little snippets, if you will, or stanzas, that we can then look at how it is structured, both in terms of the nouns and the verbs and the point of view, first person, second person, third person. And so what I've done here is reproduce a version of that psalm, and I've highlighted some things that we'll go over. It'll be a little chunky, but you know the psalm, so just keep saying it to yourself as we go the chunky route. So the first thing to observe is that there are 7 of these cameos. The first is, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. So that statement can kind of stand alone by itself, and it is in first person. It introduces the metaphor of the shepherd, which it's a relational metaphor. The Lord is my shepherd is a comment about a role and a relationship. And the effect of that is the speaker has no wants. Okay? He settles me down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. The Lord is my shepherd. First person, he does this. Third person. And what he does is provide food and drink. Settles me down in green pastures, leads me beside the still waters. He brings me back. He causes me to repent. He leads me in the paths of righteousness. That's also a third person. What is provided there is security and rescue. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. We're back to first person. There is no fear. So now we have no wants. We have food and drink and security or safety provided, and there should be no fear. So we're getting a package deal here, right? For you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. We have first person and second person right there. You might think it's one vignette. Mr. Bailey thinks it's 2, based on the changing of the perspective. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. So security is a little bit different than comfort. Comfort and security. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Preparing a table obviously has food and drink. It may have other connotations as well. But again, that provision is there. You anoint my head with oil, and my cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord for the length of days. Again, now this is a residential, maybe one step beyond just safety and security. There's a home. There's a dwelling place. And so you can see the sense of what is valued that God provides by the expression of this psalm. Another thing Bailey says is, if you just took verses 1, 4, and 7, which are the first person verses, he thinks you could have a complete little tight psalm. I'll read it to you. Top of page 3. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. You know, that reads, right? So I'm just inviting you to see the internal structure and integrity of the psalm and to let it speak to you through its parts as much as it speaks to you through its whole. So what do you think of that? You can spend some time thinking about it. You can play around with the verses. But it is significant that it changes perspectives and the third party and first person and all that kind of stuff. And so it may not surprise you that even other kings besides King David in what we call the ancient Near East used the metaphor of shepherd to describe themselves. Psalm 72 reminds us, as one commentator put it, the foremost responsibility of kings, whether they are God's kings and David or anybody else, is to provide for their people the resources they need to live, with special attention to those who are most threatened and vulnerable. So when we understand David to be the writer of Psalm 23, and when he comes along and refers to the Lord as his shepherd, and for Jesus to proclaim, I am the good shepherd, it doesn't just give us caring, and it's a political statement. I think we tend to think religion and politics don't mix. And I think we tend to point to Jesus and say, Jesus was above politics, but I think that Jesus' very existence, his entry into the world, his entry into Jerusalem in his last week, all of these things I think are political statements in that they have to do with asking the people, who is your leader? Who do you follow? To whom do you look for leadership? And Jesus has some questions along the way about paying taxes and rendering things to Caesar. But make no mistake, if Jesus were just some quiet apolitical figure who was going around teaching people to love, the society into which he came would not have felt as threatened as they did. So, to say, I am the good shepherd, is to hearken back beyond King David and beyond Jacob saying, God has been my shepherd for all my days. It's to hearken all the way back to King Hammurabi, and where kings said, I am the shepherd of my people, and I'm the one in charge. And so that is a political statement. You can think about that if you want, but he is the leader that God intends for us to follow. And so Jesus is claiming an ability and a responsibility greater than any mortal ruler. And his true sovereignty should be over all those who would follow them. So that's the significance of this shepherd language. Now, in Psalm 23, we learn a good shepherd provides. Like a benevolent ruler, the shepherd makes sure the flock has nutrition. The good shepherd leads the flock, literally taking them to places where they will prosper. And above all, we hear the contentment and the bliss of a flock, that it knows that it is cared for. The shepherd is looking out for the flock's best interest, and we get an image that the sheep, the flock, know that. There's a sense of contentment that goes along with that. The sheep need not fear. They can rejoice in knowing that they have even more than they need because of the tending nature of the shepherd. To put it in different terms, they have the assurance of abundant life. Okay? Now, at the top of page 4, I just want to keep you focused on the verbs. We talk about in our time together that the Hebrew language in which this psalm was constructed is a verbal language. We in the English-speaking world tend to focus on nouns, and we want to know what's your name and what is that and what is this, and we're all noun-oriented. To the Hebrew mind, everything's a verb. Even nouns have their roots in verbs. And so the relevant question for the Hebrew mind isn't what is it? It's what does that do? You could be talking about a chair or a pen or a ruler, a leader, a person, a king. And so just looking at Psalm 23 in its pieces and parts, we see the Good Shepherd is very active. He makes, he leads, he guides, he abides, he comforts, he prepares, and he anoints. And again, the concept there is to say, this isn't just a pastoral landscape that is beautiful and bucolic. This is an active metaphor with an energy behind it, with specific actions that the shepherd takes on our behalf. And so here's what we know when we get to John 10. Okay? The metaphor of the sheep and the shepherd made sense to the early followers and the would-be followers of Jesus. When they hear shepherd talk, whether they were trained in the scriptures of the ancient Hebrews or not, they understood shepherd talk. When Jesus claims to be the shepherd, he is claiming that the Messiah has come in him and that God is fulfilling that promise we saw in the Old Testament to shepherd God's people. Okay? When the early Christians in John's community heard the story of the shepherd and the sheep, for some it was a call back to who they were. And I tried to think of, in our modern times, what would we want to hear that would just instantly remind us who we are? And as Americans, I think that if we heard a word of independence and sacrifice for freedom, then we would go, oh yeah, I'm an American. Even if we've been caught up in a different way of doing things and we think all the laws are taking away our liberties, if somebody came up and spoke in the rhetoric of fighting for independence, we would remember who we were as American citizens. And it's that effect that speaking about being a shepherd has on the people who already had identified as God's people throughout the Old Testament. And so in ancient Palestine, multiple shepherds would bring sheep into a common sheepfold for the night. This is just a practice. It had nothing to do with God or Jesus or the Bible. And then in the morning, they had to take their sheep out for grazing, so they had to separate them from the common flock. And if we understand these practices, we can understand better some of Jesus's words in John 10. So what we know is that there was often a common place in the evening for sheep to rest, and therefore the shepherds had developed systems or practices like naming their sheep or a particular way to call their sheep so that they could differentiate their sheep from other sheep. Jesus didn't think that up. That was just part of shepherding. It reminds me of a friend I had in college. I probably told you this before, but I decided I'm now old enough to repeat myself and tell all my stories multiple times. I had this friend in college, and she had a sister and a brother, and so there were 3 children in the family, and the mom. And the dad had a whistle or a sound for each of them. He could be, they all, I saw it happen. They could be in Cameron Indoor Stadium in the midst of the Duke basketball mayhem, not necessarily during the game because they wouldn't do that, but before the game or after the game. And he would make his particular sound for each particular individual. They would hear it and they would know, that's my dad. I need to find that sound and go meet my dad. This was before cell phones, you know. You couldn't just text somebody and say, meet me at the concession stand. So how brilliant is that? And the shepherds already thought of it. They had a way to keep people. Sometimes in the summer, if it was warm enough, you could just keep your sheep out in the pastures overnight, and you would have to find a way to pen them in. There were piled up rocks. Sometimes there were natural formations. Sometimes you had to pile the rocks up. Sometimes the shepherds of centuries had already piled up the rocks for you. It wasn't necessarily a natural formation, but you knew where it was. But invariably, you had to find a way to close it off. They didn't have a roof. It didn't have a door. And so sometimes the shepherd himself would sleep in the entrance. And that was just a standard practice. That happened way before God and Jesus thought about thinking of themselves as shepherds or sheep gates. And so when Jesus comes on the scene and says he is the gate for the sheep, some say he is still using the image of a shepherd because it's the shepherd who becomes the sheep gate, but applying it differently as a picture of the shepherd sleeping in the entrance. And then before we get to John 10, we're just thinking about John 10. We're anticipating what it's going to tell us, and we're saying, well, what do we know about these things? Well, John 10 is going to describe the Good Shepherd in contrast to other people. Some of those other people are thieves and robbers. And what we hear is that Jesus brings and gives life, while the thieves and robbers take life. This is a common rhetorical device. If you want to make a point, you find a way to contrast it, and then he does it again and again. Jesus, I am the good shepherd, I come to bring life, while the thieves and the robbers steal and take life. I am the good shepherd, the sheep gate, I protect my sheep and give them pasture. The thief is only interested in death and destruction. What we see is that Jesus has a life-giving or positive effect on the sheep. He creates a sustainable way of life, whereas the thief has a negative impact because the thief is acting for his own selfish interests. And when Jesus says in John 10:10, I have come that they may have life and have it to the full, he is certainly in line with the Old Testament view of God our shepherd, that life-giving leadership and even going beyond. It's not just they will stay alive or be alive, they will have abundance to the full. So it occurred to me, I don't usually do this. I don't think I reprinted actually John 10. I reprinted the song. Did I reprint it? I don't think I did. So what's that? Okay. I don't have a page 8, that's why. I'm glad y'all have a page 8. So if you want to put that side by side, then you can see some of what I'm talking about. Usually I try to put the text there, so we're looking at the text while we're gleaning or garnering our insights. So, but my next point, which is going to take up pages 5 and 6, I think is the real meat of Psalm 23 and John 10 is. And I call it the meat because it's easy to see the imagery associated with shepherding and pastures and still waters and sheep gates. But what is implied, what you have to infer from both of these passages, that is that if the Lord is your shepherd, or if Jesus is the good shepherd, that makes us sheep. And I don't know about you, but I kind of go kicking and screaming into that part of the metaphor. It's all well and good for Jesus to be the good shepherd. I love the 23rd Psalm. It's a great comfort many times, not just at funerals, but we like that imagery. What we are slower to embrace is the implication that we are the sheep. I'm sorry. I don't shoot the messenger. It seems like bad news, right? Hear the good news. No. You are a sheep. Who wants to be a sheep? I've been to lots of leadership conferences. They have animals, are you a lion? Are you a duck? Even ducks get to be leaders. No one once ever in a leadership conference has sheep as a desirable model for leadership. Why? Well, I'll give you some reasons. Sheep are the only domesticated animal that cannot survive in the wild. You could turn a cow back into the wild and the cow would survive. You could turn a dog back into the wild and the dog would survive, not sheep. Cats, dogs, horses, pigs, They may get thin, they may get smart, but they will get by. Not sheep. Sheep get eaten. Sheep don't have any offensive or defensive weapons. They don't have claws, they don't have fangs, they don't have a shell, they don't have an odorous spray like a skunk. They really can't fight. They're not equipped. They're slow. Have you ever watched sheep? They're just not in a hurry. Why would they be in a hurry? They're apparently not very strong, and they can't go for very long. I mean, I think they have one job, and that's to carry around wool. And they do that very well, but it's not conducive to speed or stamina. And I understand, I didn't make these things up, I researched them. Sheep don't really have their own sense of direction. Horses, dogs, we see the TV shows and we watch in nature, and they find their way home. Some horse throws off its rider, and then they appear at the ranch, and they go, oh my gosh, what happened to Susie? Not sheep. They have bad eyesight. This might explain why they have no sense of direction. They can barely hear. They can hear their shepherd, but they can't even really run away effectively because they're slow and don't have a lot of stamina. And even if they can run, they can't hide. When they are even probably slightly scared, they have a reflex that's called in the literature an overactive startle reflex, so that they make a sound. They go when they're startled. So imagine trying to hide when you're, and a mosquito flies in front of your eye, and you go, and then they find you. Okay? They don't blend. Dogs bark, cats hiss, snakes rattle, sheep bat. It's not a whole lot to go with. Sheep are known, and again, as I go deeper and deeper into this, it's okay if your body wants to kind of go like, oh my God, I don't want to be a sheep. Stop, the merry-go-round. Sheep are known for being dumb, stubborn, and willful. Even with a shepherd around, sheep can get lost, drowned, or get trapped. It's just a fact of nature about sheep. And here we have God and Jesus and everybody in between telling me I am a sheep. Sheep have, this is the worst one for me. Somehow, I don't know how it happens, they have a propensity to get flipped over and lay on their backs. And once they're turned upside down, they cannot recover by themselves from that position. I mean, even some of us can fall down and still get back up. Not sheep. All they can do once they're upside down is wave their little legs in the air helplessly. And if they are not assisted when they are in that position, they die. There's just nothing to be done for them when they get like that. So I'm not happy about being a sheep. So who wants to be a sheep? I put some thoughts out there. Maybe the ones who want to know what the voice of the Good Shepherd sounds like. Maybe they want to be sheep. Because if they embrace that part of the metaphor, they can feel the safety and the security and the protection and what it is like to be called by name in a familiar voice. Or maybe none of us wants to be sheep, but we can find it in our souls to willingly submit ourselves to God and to Jesus as if we are sheep, simply because God asks us to trust God as if we are sheep. Now, I think that what I'm saying is that we pretend, okay? And many of you might be, and I'm all about authenticity and be who you are, but sometimes I pretend, and I have to ask myself, given everything I know about shepherding and the Good Shepherd and God as the shepherd and Jesus as the Good Shepherd, can I, even for some moments, allow myself to be a sheep because I know that that's what God wants of me. And maybe the jury is still out, but here's what I know. I traveled, when I was in law school, I did a summer abroad at Cambridge. And I went with a good friend of mine who I was in law school with. And we just marched to the tune of different drummers. Okay? I'm sure you have some experiences. I don't know if you're me or if you're my friend, but one of us, that was me, was if we said we're going to go to dinner at 6, I was dressed, had my contact lenses in or whatever. I walk over to her room, I knock on the door about 5 minutes to 6, and I'm ready to go because we have a plan. Well, early in the trip, she would be just like, oh my gosh, I need to put my contact lenses in, I'm not ready yet. But then, you know, a week later, she'd be like, oh, I was napping, I need to take a shower. And she just had a different pace of life than I did, right? But I said, because you all need a friend like this, you know, when I show up on time and ready to go, and you are increasingly not ready to go for various reasons, whether it's contact lenses, brushing your teeth, getting dressed, taking a shower, for goodness sakes, still sleeping instead of setting an alarm of some sort to wake yourself up, or calling me and saying, I'm not going to be ready, let's make it 6:30, that is very selfish, and you are saying your time is more important than my time. Now, I'm not proud of all that I let into her. Her mother was very happy. Her mother to this day would say, oh my gosh, Teresa, you're a saint because you gave her that talk. And her mother would go, I tried giving her that talk for 30 years. It never stuck. But there are times when I need to be patient. I need to set aside my regular pace of life. And what I do is pretend to be that friend. I just say to myself, you know, like if you're trying to get the kids ready and get out the door really fast and they just can't. Or if you're going out with a group of people to a restaurant and I don't know what happens, the reservation gets lost, you thought you had 6 people, you have 8 people, somebody wants to eat inside, somebody wants to eat outside. I just have to pretend. I just have to say, okay, for this hour, I'm going to pretend that I'm her. Have you ever done anything like that? Well, I invite you to try it. If not for, you know, your patience or whatever, try it because you just need to figure out sometimes how to be a sheep. Okay? There are other times I pretend. I sometimes will just make up my mind. I'm going to pretend that this, whatever it is, this doesn't bother me. Here's another example. I have a special gift in grocery stores. When I go to the grocery store, it doesn't matter if I'm with somebody or by myself, it doesn't matter if it's Kroger or Publix or Trader Joe's, my soul gravitates to the problem line. It's a skill, like a divining rod. And I try to assess, oh, that person's got a whole bunch of groceries, this one only has one, or, oh, these 2 women have separate transactions, so it's not really one person. I mean, I'm thinking. It's not something I can see, because invariably after that person has checked out with their, you know, only had 13 groceries to start with, they have a coupon for every single one of them. And some of the coupons are expired and they just don't want it to be the case. And the clerk is like, you know, it's expired. Well, I think you should take it anyway. Or some food is not covered by whatever it is they're trying to use, if it's their SNAP or I can't think of what it is, so I can't look for it. But I can tell you that I get in those grocery store lines every single time. Sometimes somebody will get behind me. I do this, and I go, I know this line looks short. That's why I'm in it. But I've got a skill that picks out trouble lines. So if I were you, I'd pick out another line. I have to say before I go into the grocery store, I am not going to let the fact that there's always trouble in the grocery line in front of me bother me. It's just I can't wait till I'm already in the throes of it. Because if I'm already in the throes of it, it's just terrible. And I don't want to be that person who goes and sighs and tries to put the mark her down prematurely. I mean, I just don't, I've been that person. I don't like being that person. So I decide in advance. Today, when I go to Kroger, I resolve not to let that propensity bother me. That's my best advice on embracing sheep, the sheep metaphor. You cannot have a full understanding and vision of God, our shepherd, or Jesus, the good shepherd, if you're not willing to see yourself as a sheep. And you have to take that list of pages 5 and 6 and say, oh my God. Whether or not we want to be sheep, the human condition is just like this. And I picked the worst, what I consider the worst trait of the sheep. Sometimes we find ourselves upside down or in some other position from which we cannot recover through our own efforts. I have a friend whose son died in an automobile accident at 3 a.m, 22 years old. I believe she is in a position, you can call it upside down, you can call it grief, but that is a position from which she cannot recover under her own efforts. It may be that you all have losses or disease processes or things going on in your life. It could be abuse from the past. It could be things that have haunted your family that really have nothing to do with you, but that generational angst and trauma and anxiety moves forward with your lives and your family's life. Whatever it is, there are things that we cannot recover from. We are upside down with our little feet in the air, and the one who comes to our assistance is the shepherd. And if that means I have to be a sheep, then I want to be a sheep, at least sometimes. Because the shepherd who uprights the sheep is God. And that is God the Father, and God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. And when you accept this truth of the human condition, maybe you want to be like a sheep as well. Because when we become like sheep, we become people of the Good Shepherd. We get to be in that family where the dad has that noise that he makes for the children and the spouse to come running. And to go back to how essential this concept of shepherding and sheep was to the early Christians, early on in Christianity, there's evidence that Christian people were scratching images of the Good Shepherd on catacomb walls. In other words, this is who I am. You might write Kilroy was here, or, etch in a tree your little heart with you and your sweetheart. People were showing the image of a good shepherd with that lamb slung over his shoulders. We know that image. They were sketching that. They have evidence on the catacombs of early Christianity. As things progressed, they painted frescoes of sheep on baptismal fonts. They carved the Good Shepherd into tombs. So you had the beginning of life and the end of life, and you had shepherds and sheep. And people were owning this. And they knew they belonged to the Good Shepherd from the beginning to the end. And the Good Shepherd was more than just words. It was more than an idea. It was their brand. Everybody needs a brand these days, right? I mean, not just cereal and soft drinks, but we who are still in the job market, for example, you got to have a brand. You're going to be perky. You're going to be studious. I don't know. I don't have a brand. Jesus is my brand. I want to be a sheep. Brand me. So the question becomes, after we understand all this, after we take in this knowledge and we mine the scripture for all those great attributes and the relational aspect of shepherd and sheep, and then we somehow find a way at least to think about what it means to be a sheep, whether we accept it or not yet, we have to ask ourselves, are we willing to live the Good Shepherd way? And we'll talk more about this next week, because it is the language in 1 Peter that really talks about the Good Shepherd way. what we get if we can and are willing to live the Good Shepherd way is we can grab hold of hope during dark times. We have the ability to be encouraging to one another in that Good Shepherd way. Just as you can be held close by the loving shepherd, so we can reach out. Because we have been held close and we know what that feels like, then we have the ability to, what we call now, pay it forward. And we can do that with generosity. We are well fed. We are well cared for. We have oil anointed. Feasts have been prepared for us. And so there is no reason for us to hold back. We can give things away, give our energy, our love away, because we have received it in abundance. And then we can begin to do that work of caring for the very least and the lost, for the common good. And when we do all of this, we become known for being loving people in the world. And that is what Jesus wants from us. Now we have the book of Revelations. It says you have one job, and that's to proclaim Jesus is Lord, right? Well, this is when you do that job, proclaiming Jesus as Lord. It should manifest itself by care for the very least and the lost. It should manifest itself by reaching out with loving arms to others in the world. And that's what I get out of this sheep and shepherd metaphors. I leave it to you to think about how it affects you in other ways. I think at the very least, if the next time you're at a funeral or in worship or something, you're sitting in your home reading the 23rd Psalm, if you read it more slowly, or if you reread Jesus' words, I am the good shepherd, and instead of focusing on all the attributes of Jesus, you just sit there and think about yourself as a sheep, then I think we're moving along in our relationship with God. And of course, the shepherd metaphor is all about relationship. Next week, we take a turn. We're going to jig and jag. Because next week, I think I've entitled it, the sheep become the shepherd. So we're going to go full circle. We're going to start with God, our shepherd. We're going to feel like sheep. We're going to be sheep. And then Jesus is going to tell us, you're the shepherd. And we're going to go, wait, I was just getting used to being a sheep. But we can do it under God's strength. Amen.